Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you all very much for being here on such a splendid Melbourne evening. Grattan Institute embodies the idea that ideas can make a difference. And the road that's led to the formal launch today shows the power of an idea. And the road we've mapped out for the future for Grattan over the next few years, I hope will lead to many more ideas making a difference. But I thought it would be worth reviewing tonight the road we've travelled to understand how an idea can become a reality. One of the first mileposts towards Grattan Institute was a conversation between Terry Moran, Glyn Davis and Michael Rue in August 2004 at the Australia&apos Connection Forum. History doesn't record whether it was on the beach, but it does record that they agreed that there was a gap in Australian political life because we lacked a heavyweight, independent think tank. Over 2005, this idea was fleshed out by several people in the Victorian Department of Premier and Cabinet, including Ben Rimmer, Donald Spiegel, Greg Highwood and Ian Wood, and they discussed it with a number of Australia's corporate leaders. By the end of 2005, there was enough detail for then Premier Steve Bracks to meet with the then Federal Treasurer Peter Costello to define the theme for the think tank, Australia as a liberal democracy in a globalised economy, a phrase that is now enshrined in our Constitution. The bid for the US Study Centre in 2006 may have been a little distraction, definitely provided a detour, but it also created much closer links between Melbourne University, Victorian Government and corporate Australia. And these links, along with a supportive report from McKinsey and Company, were the basis for Premier Bracks and Treasurer Brumby in early 2007, promising significant Victorian funding for the idea and asking Glyn Davis at Melbourne University to turn the idea into a reality. Alan Myers, by that stage, had been asked to head the core group with a brief to agree on a constitution, nail down the funding and find a name. All of the core group are now individual members of the Grattan Institute, and they were supported by Michael Caine in the Department of Premier and Cabinet, Donald Spiegel, who by then had moved from the department to Melbourne University, and Gillian Constable, and all of them are here tonight, and thank you for your contributions. Enough had been settled by June 2007 for Alan Myers and David Kemp to meet with the Commonwealth Treasurer Peter Costello to seek Commonwealth financial support. Then an election intervened, and as sometimes happens with an election, some of the players changed. Julia Gillard, in her new role as Deputy Prime Minister, was approached with a detailed proposal early in her term that was in fact the fruit of 3 years' careful development. And so, buried deep in the Commonwealth additional portfolio estimates on the 14th of February 2008, bedtime reading for every aspiring journalist, you can find an appropriation of $15 million for a public policy institute, a suitably generic description when you haven't yet agreed on a name. The Victorian Government announced matching funding a month or two later in April 2008, along with substantial support in kind from the University of Melbourne. No matter that the press conference for this announcement was in fact dominated by discussion about the taxi strike blocking the streets of Melbourne, Grattan Institute at least had fuel in the tank, and with commitments from BHP and NAB, its momentum increased. The search for a chief executive began, and the only thing that could go wrong would be failure to agree on a name. And so here we are today. There is no Carlton Institute, a suggestion at one stage, but which for some reeked of football and beer. Nor is there a Pearson Institute, named after that now very well remembered 19th century statesman. But instead we have Grattan Institute, sharing a name with a well-known journalist, but acknowledging its location amongst the heartland of ideas and student watering holes. Based in Melbourne, but nationally focused, Grattan Institute is here. Apart from recognising the tireless efforts and contributions of those I've mentioned, Pat McLean as the Interim General Manager, Grattan Institute's other initial staff and many others who've been crowded out by my attempt to compress 4 years of history into 5 minutes, what can we learn from this history? I think we can learn that a good idea can eventually get momentum. It will often need drive from government, from academia, from business, and from the public. And when these things all push in the same direction, reality does change. But without the original idea, we wouldn't be here. So what are we going to do with the reality of Grattan Institute? In choosing our initial topics, we've stayed true to the direction of Australia as a liberal democracy in a globalised economy. We're focusing on Australian domestic policy. We've looked for topics where fact-based analysis and public discussion can change people's minds. And we've looked for areas where important issues are not being talked about enough. I hope that you will recognise all of these features in our initial topic areas. Changing our energy production, how we produce electricity and fuel our vehicles, is perhaps the biggest single challenge for this generation. Water, for agriculture, for industry, and for private consumption, is one of our most basic needs, and we're using more than we collect. Cities house almost 90% of Australia's population, and so how they're designed makes a difference. School education lasts for life and is probably the biggest lever for increasing Australia's prosperity. And health is our largest public expenditure, set to become much larger as Australians age. Ideas, independently thought through, clearly presented, can make a difference in each of these areas. Our search for program directors in each of these areas is underway, with over 150 applications, and if you know anyone else who might be suitable, please encourage them to apply. In conclusion, success has many parents. It takes some courage for governments to support an institute whose very mission is to articulate views that diverge from the current consensus. New ideas and public discussion are often uncomfortable, but in the end, they will make Australia a better country. Thank you to all of you here tonight and all of those I've mentioned who have helped turn an idea into reality. We look forward to your support as we articulate many more ideas, some of which I'm sure will change our future. Thank you. We are very lucky at the moment to have with us a distinguished visitor from Brookings Institution, an institution which has been in many ways an inspiration for the foundation of Grattan Institute. Thomas Mann is here as the W. Averill Harriman Chair and Senior Fellow in Governance Studies at the Brookings Institution and formerly the Director of Governmental Studies at Brookings. He's eminently qualified to talk to us about the place of think tanks in a modern democracy, and please join me in welcoming him here tonight.
Thank you very much, John. Before I begin, I simply have to take note of... Aren't the graphics beautiful for the Grattan Institute? First out of the box, John, way to go. It sets just the right tone for this institution. I'm really thrilled to be present at the public launch of the Grattan Institute. In a minor way, I feel as if I was present at the creation. I met early to talk about think tanks and a new institution in Australia with many of the initial architects, which included a number of conversations with Glenn Davis and Donald Spiegel. I then had the good fortune to serve on the committee charged with identifying the Institute's first CEO. John Daley is well on his way to making us all look good. I've spent the last 22 years of my professional life at the Brookings Institution, the first dozen as director of its governmental studies program. I hope you'll forgive me and indulge me a little bit for bragging, but Brookings is a terrific institution. Glenn knows that. He spent some time with us some years ago. 7 years from its centenary, it almost always appears at the top of the rankings of think tanks based on overall quality, innovative ideas, and impact on the public policy debate. I love working there and couldn't imagine finding a more satisfying way to spend my professional life. So I got a real kick when at the press conference originally announcing the financial commitments to start a new think tank in Melbourne, someone referred to it as Brookings on the Yarra. Remember, Alan? Now, in preparation for this occasion, I've been rereading A History of Brookings, published on its 75th anniversary. It was sobering to be reminded of the fits and starts, the ups and downs, the triumphs and setbacks, and the not infrequent unpopularity following the release of some of our studies. We were apparently quite tough on a number of FDR's initiatives to lead the country out of a depression, and often made politicians of both parties uncomfortable. Over the years, we faced some tough financial times, found ourselves operating in a much larger and more competitive think tank world, and faced periods when ideological primacy and rigidity diminished the market for our work. But through it all, we stuck by values that defined us: quality, independence, impact. We sought to match the best research conducted at universities and gain the respect of our scholarly colleagues. We existed not to help a particular political party or advance an ideological worldview. We would strive to avoid writing briefs for pre-existing beliefs, to retain a capacity to be surprised by our research findings, and to respect those who differed and treat their arguments and evidence with seriousness and civility. Think tanks are organizations that generate policy-oriented research, analysis, and advice on domestic and international issues that enable policymakers and the public to make informed decisions about public policy issues. Their numbers exploded in recent decades, by one count totaling over 5,000 around the world and more than 1,500 in the United States. But many of these are small units affiliated with universities, operate mainly under government contracts, are in some countries effectively an arm of the government, or are advanced quite explicitly, are designed quite explicitly to advance ideological or partisan goals. The number of truly independent and evidence-driven think tanks is much smaller. Now, why the proliferation of think tanks? Democratization, transparency, new communications technology, the substantive and political complexity of problems facing governments, and the globalization of economic and social life have put a premium on genuine think tanks. They are a bridge between academia and government. They generate, evaluate, and promote new policy ideas. They can say impolitic things, but also help overcome political barriers. They draw on the best technical work, but communicate their ideas clearly and compellingly In fact, we can, at their best, understand what they're saying and be moved and persuaded by it. Now, to be rigorous and independent is not to be dull or non-judgmental. The task is definitely not to find some golden mean between polarized ideological positions. Difficult problems sometimes require bold solutions, ones that do not studiously balance the interest of all policy contestants. We live in very challenging and exciting times. We feel it keenly in America and are energized by it, and I know you feel the same way here in Australia. I think the Grattan Institute is conceived and designed to thrive and to contribute in this environment to Australia and to the world. I am honored to be present at its launch. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Tom. It's now my honour to ask if the Premier of Victoria would formally come here to launch the Institute. As we've already mentioned, Victorian Government has been a very strong supporter of Grattan Institute in indeed getting the idea off the ground in the first place, and then in terms of providing substantial financial support to get it flying. So, Premier, thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much to John Daley and to all of our distinguished guests here tonight, to Alan Myers, QC, the chair of the Grattan Institute, and Alan, of course, who has done, I think, such a magnificent job as chair. John Daley is the CEO, Glenn Davis, Vice-Chancellor, Thomas Mann, thank you to Thomas for your contribution today, to Tony Lupton, the Cabinet Secretary, to the Secretary of the Federal Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet, Terry Moran, who's with us today, the Secretary of my Department of Premier and Cabinet, Helen Silver, to so many other people tonight. As I look around the room tonight, there are so many people here tonight for whom this Institute has been a passion and a dream for some years, and tonight turns that dream into a reality. And I know there are many people here too who worked, as it turned out, unsuccessfully on the US Study Centre proposal, but there are so many of us in the community of Melbourne who have had this passion and had this dream to lead Australia in this area of public policy think tank. And we've always had a great reputation in Melbourne. We've had a great reputation in Victoria, I believe, as being the ideas capital of Australia. But there's been one piece of the jigsaw that's been missing, and that's to have a genuinely internationally focused, a genuinely nationally focused world standing in this area, and I believe that the Grattan Institute will fill that gap. John mentioned the press conference that Julia Gillard and Alan Myers and I did, I think towards 2008, probably the first half, time flies, outside 1 Treasury Place. And, you know, Alan is very accomplished, of course, with the media, but whenever I'm doing a press conference with somebody, I say that what's going to happen here is we'll go out and we'll stand up and we'll speak eloquently and passionately and succinctly about what it is that we're announcing today, and we'll elaborate on that, and then we'll ask for questions. And if we're lucky, we might get one, but mainly they'll turn to the political issues of the day. And sure enough, we went out there, but we actually got a few questions, didn't we, about the public? And then we got to taxi drivers. And it was helpful having an eminent QC there who was able to give me a bit of legal advice about what I couldn't say about taxi drivers. We have all had this aspiration to lock in our reputation as the ideas capital of Australia, and I believe that's what the Grattan Institute will do. John, in his remarks, talked about the difference that great ideas can make, and I agree with what he said. Another way of saying that is Benjamin Franklin, who said, quote, "An investment in knowledge always pays the best interest." And it's true. You can't beat investment in knowledge. You can't beat investment in big ideas. And that's where the Grattan Institute fits. It's an institute which is about knowledge and learning. It's about great ideas. It's about great public policy. And I believe, too, it's a great partnership. You can see the founding partners here, but there are so many other individuals and institutions in our city and our state who've been part of this great partnership. One of the things that really sets out cities around the world, the great cities from the also-rans, is great cities have great institutions. They have great institutions of learning, of culture, of art. And that's true, of course, when you think of Melbourne. And we've been extraordinarily well endowed with our universities, whether we're talking about Melbourne and Monash and our others, of course, but Melbourne and Monash particularly, which always rank up there amongst the very best universities in Australia and in the world. We've got great arts institutions, whether it's the NGV or whether it's our recent additions, such as the Melbourne Recital Hall. We've got a great library. We've got great medical research institutions, which are the envy of people all around the world. And again, we've been adding to them with significant government investment in recent years. Whether you think about the doubling of the size of the Walter and Eliza Hall Institute, or you think of the Australian Synchrotron, or you think of Bio21, these are great investments in institutions. But again, I think there's been one thing that's been missing. We've had some good think tanks. We've got good think tanks, very good think tanks, that are attached to our universities. But we've never had one up there, if you like, in lights with genuine world standing. And so this point about great institutions is important because we've got a great history in that regard. I believe we've been building on that, whether it's in the arts, whether it's in the culture, whether it's in education, whether it's building the best sporting precinct in the world. I believe that our city can boast the best institutions, and this now is another feather in our cap and another brand, if you like, to associate with Melbourne. There's another point that links with that, and that is philanthropy. And Melbourne is defined by its great institutions, but I believe that we are defined by something else as well, and that is our generosity as a community. Historian Geoffrey Blaney has said that Melbourne's leadership in philanthropy was on par with its leadership in medical research. And you think of Melbourne's position, our state's position as the leading philanthropic state, it's well documented, thanks to the extraordinary generosity of people. Alfred Felton, Helen Macpherson, Walter and Eliza Hall, and of course Alan and Maria Myers. 3/4 of Australia's philanthropic foundations are now based in Melbourne. It's an extraordinary achievement. And many passionate Victorians have followed in the footsteps of these generous Australians, and they have supported Melbourne and Victoria's institutions and all that they stand for. And again, I think if you think of this institute as a great partnership, as a great new institution, and founded on those very best traditions and values of philanthropy and community giving, it puts this institute in its context. And when we look forward to the work of this institute, I believe that it has the right focus, I believe it has the right partnerships, I believe it has the right strategy, and most importantly, it has the right people. And this is very much a people business, getting the right people, getting the right board, getting the right CEO, getting the right researchers, absolutely crucial to the work that this will do. When you look back through history and you ask the question, what is it that has made our state strong, there are a number of things that come to mind. But I think foremost amongst them are ideas and enterprise and also generous community spirit, philanthropy. And you think of the challenges we face, Thomas Mann mentioned those. I don't think there's been a period in our modern European history when we have faced challenges as profound as those today. And so having a great institute of knowledge, a great institute of public policy, a great institute of ideas like the Grattan Institute will be crucial to get us through these challenges. I welcome, obviously, this exceptional new voice in public policy and debate. I hope in the years ahead that the Grattan Institute won't just put Melbourne and Victoria on the map, but it will also put Australia on the map in terms of how we contribute to the big debates and the big ideas of our time. You've heard tonight from John about much of the history of this new institute, but I just wanted to say tonight, to go back to where I began my remarks, to everyone here tonight, because there are so many people here tonight who have all played a role in one way or another in the formation of this institute. So to all of you, can I thank you. From our perspective as a state government, we were delighted to join with the Rudd government, and particularly through the efforts of Julia Gillard, to make sure that this would be a significant partnership. I believe it is a great partnership, but it couldn't have happened without some of the corporate and other philanthropic support. And Alan, if I can say to you, your chairmanship of this, I think, has been quite outstanding. Your contribution to the state more generally as chair of the NGV and other courses is also quite outstanding. We thank you for that, and I have great pleasure tonight in officially, I can't declare it open, officially launching the Grattan Institute. Thank you.